The hills of eastern Washington keeps resurfacing. A bottomless pit said to be a pathway to the paranormal.
There is a stretch of land in eastern Washington state where the trees grow right up to the edge of something and then stop. Not because of rock, not because of a road, and not because of anything a forester or a geologist could explain with the tools they were trained to use. They stop because, for reasons that no animal seems able to ignore, the ground simply ends there, and what lies beyond that edge has never, in any documented moment of recorded history, made a sound. This is the story of Mels Hole. And before you decide what you believe about it, understand something important. The strangest part of this story is not the hole itself. The strangest part is what happened when someone finally decided to look inside it. In the winter of 1997, a man who gave his name only as Mel Waters called into a late-night American radio program called Coast to Coast AM. The show, which has broadcast for decades across the continental United States, had always attracted callers with unusual stories. But Mel was different from the moment he spoke. He was not excitable. He was not selling anything. He described what he had found in the measured, careful tone of someone who had spent years deciding whether or not to say anything at all. Mel told the host that he owned a piece of rural land near Ellensburg, Washington, close to a ridge of high country called Manistash Ridge. On this land, he said, there was a hole. Not a mine shaft, not a well, not a sinkhole. A hole that, as far as he could determine after years of personal investigation, had no bottom. He described lowering fishing line into it, not a few hundred feet, not a few thousand, but spool after spool after spool, each one tied to the last, until he had sent more than 15 miles of line straight down into the dark. The line never went taut. It never caught. It never reached anything at all. Mel went on. He said that animals avoided the area entirely. His dogs, who would follow him anywhere on the property, refused to approach. Birds altered their flight paths to avoid passing directly overhead. The air around the opening felt different, heavier, he said, like the pressure just before a storm that never quite arrived. Local residents had apparently been using the hole for decades as a disposal site, throwing in refrigerators, tires, and dead livestock. None of it ever made a sound on impact. Nothing ever came back up. The hole simply swallowed everything and returned nothing, not even an echo. Mel's call lasted several hours across multiple appearances on the program. By the time it was over, millions of people had heard him. And then, like a stone dropped into his own impossible hole, Mel Waters disappeared from public life entirely. Within days of his radio appearance, geologists and physicists were offering explanations. All of them arrived at the same conclusion. The hole Mel described was physically impossible. The Earth's crust does not work that way. The deeper you go underground, the hotter and more pressurized the rock becomes. The deepest hole ever drilled by human beings, the Kola Super Deep Borehole in Russia's Kola Peninsula, took Soviet engineers more than 2 decades to complete, and it reached only about 7.6 miles before the equipment began failing. At that depth, the rock was behaving more like a slow liquid than a solid. The ambient temperature had climbed to nearly 180 degrees Celsius. Drilling further was simply not possible. Mel claimed 15 miles of fishing line had gone in and touched nothing. By the laws of physics as we understand them, the walls of any structure that deep should have been closing in around themselves, crushed by the weight of the earth above. The temperature alone would have vaporized anything organic. Geologists were not simply skeptical. They were confident. The hole, they said, was a fabrication. But here is the problem with that conclusion. It explains nothing about what happened next. Shortly after his first radio appearances, Mel Waters reported that unfamiliar vehicles had begun parking near his property. Black sedans without markings. Tire tracks in places where he had never seen any. Then, one afternoon, he returned home to find his access to the land blocked entirely. Men in yellow protective suits were moving around the site with clipboards, and not one of them would answer a single question. The official explanation, when one was finally offered, was vague. Access had been restricted due to safety concerns related to a possible aircraft incident in the area. Mel saw no crash debris. He saw no emergency personnel. He saw no news coverage. He saw no investigation. He simply was not allowed back onto his own land. What came next, according to Mel, was an offer. A payment of $25,000 per year, conditional on 2 requirements: that he leave the country and that he never speak publicly about the hole again. He says he was also warned that certain legal complications involving activity on his property could emerge if he declined. Mel left for Australia. He made no legal challenge. He filed no formal complaint. He was simply gone, and the story faded with him. Until 2002, when he called the radio program again. The man who spoke in 2002 was different from the one who had called in 1997. His words came slowly. He repeated himself. He said he had gaps in his memory, stretches of time he could not account for. He described waking up in places he did not recognize and finding marks on his body from medical procedures he had no memory of receiving. He spoke about a second hole, this one somewhere in the Nevada desert, larger and more heavily guarded than the first. And then, partway through describing what had been found near the Nevada site, the details grew darker than anything he had shared before. He never finished that description. He vanished again not long afterward, and this time he has not returned. Forum posts, brief mentions in collections of American paranormal folklore. Then the internet changed everything. The first wave came through Reddit, where a user compiled the original radio transcripts alongside topographic maps, property records, and satellite imagery of the Manistash Ridge area. The post was long, detailed, and sourced, and it spread to other corners of the platform within hours. True crime researchers, amateur geologists, and conspiracy theorists all arrived at the same thread from different directions, and for years, Mel's story lived in the margins, archived radio recordings, typewritten ACH contributing to something new. Then came the satellite images. A user identifying themselves as Depthwalker33 posted a set of coordinates and an image pulled from publicly available satellite mapping software. The image showed a clearing in dense forest near Manistash Ridge, a perfectly circular area with no vegetation, no structures, and no visible explanation for why that particular patch of earth should be bare while everything surrounding it was densely wooded. The coordinates matched, with remarkable closeness, the general location Mel had described in his 1997 calls. What happened next caused a significant portion of the online community to stop treating the story as entertainment. Within days of the coordinates being shared widely, that section of satellite imagery was blurred. Not gradually, not through any announced update to the mapping software, but overnight. The area went from a clear, high-resolution image to the same kind of pixelated obscuring that typically marks classified military installations on public mapping tools. The blurring has remained ever since. People noticed, and people began to go. Over the following years, groups of varying sizes and technical sophistication made their way into the forests of eastern Washington. What distinguished the later expeditions from simple ghost hunting excursions was the quality of the equipment being brought in. Former military personnel, engineers, surveyors, and documentary filmmakers began organizing trips with professional-grade instruments, ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR sensors, thermal imaging cameras, and magnetometers designed to detect subtle variations in the Earth's electromagnetic field. The reports that came back were consistent in ways that no coordination between the groups could easily explain, given that many of them did not know each other existed. GPS devices began malfunctioning at specific distances from the clearing. Compass readings became unreliable and eventually meaningless. Drone signals cut out precisely at the perimeter of the bare ground, not at random, not gradually, but at a specific threshold as though crossing an invisible boundary. Several people described a physical sensation, pressure in the chest, a sudden awareness of something that could not be named when standing at the edge of the clearing. Audio recordings captured static that had no identifiable electronic source. One group reported that their timestamp footage had a consistent discrepancy between the clock on the camera and the time logged on a separate device that had not been brought anywhere near the site. None of this is evidence. It is testimony. But the consistency of that testimony, from people who did not know each other and were not coordinating their accounts, made researchers pay attention. In 2023, a group of 5 people arrived at the site with equipment that was qualitatively different from anything that had come before. These were not enthusiasts with consumer cameras and flashlights. The group included 2 documentary producers with backgrounds in investigative journalism, a drone engineer who had previously built equipment for geological survey work, and 2 individuals with experience in wilderness and technical fieldwork. They had spent months planning the operation and weeks building and testing their rig. The device they built was essentially a tethered drone, a camera system designed to descend vertically on a reinforced cable. The camera itself was a low-light 4K unit paired with thermal and infrared sensors. The cable was engineered to withstand extreme tension, heat, and electromagnetic interference. Every component was tested twice before the team drove to Washington. They did not live stream. They did not post to social media from the site. Their only objective was footage, documentation of whatever existed at the bottom of or inside Mels' hole. The descent began in the early morning. The cable played out smoothly. The feed from the camera was clear and stable, transmitted to a laptop the team was watching from a safe distance above. The walls of the structure, visible in the camera's light, were smooth, unnaturally so, as though whatever had formed this opening had done so without the fracturing and irregular texturing that characterizes every other geological formation on Earth. There was no moisture on the walls, no root systems, no sediment, just smooth, dark stone receding below. And then the temperature readings began to drop. Not rise, drop. At depths where the geothermal gradient should have been pushing ambient temperatures upward, the sensors were recording a rapid decrease, eventually reaching readings consistent with polar ice shelf conditions. The cable showed no frost. The team's instruments above ground showed no corresponding change in surface conditions. Whatever cold existed down there was contained entirely within the hole. At roughly 300 feet of depth, something changed in the feed. The first anomaly was a pulse of light. Not a reflection from the camera's own lighting. The sensors confirmed the light source was below the camera, deeper in the structure. It was dim, slow, and rhythmic. The team described it later as resembling a heartbeat more than any mechanical or geological phenomenon they were familiar with. At 400 feet, the light intensified briefly and then vanished. The magnetometer attached to the drone began registering fluctuations that the engineer would later describe as inconsistent with any known geological or man-made source. The compass system on board became inoperable. The camera continued descending. At 580 feet, the feed captured something that none of the 5 people watching the screen could immediately explain. There was a shape in the frame. It was not a shadow caused by the camera's own light source. The team reviewed the geometry afterward and confirmed that no angle of the mounted lights could have produced what appeared on screen. It was tall and narrow, positioned between the camera and the wall of the shaft. It was not moving. It did not appear to be made of anything the team could name. It was simply there, occupying space that had been empty in the previous frame, with a quality of stillness that, according to every member of the team who later described the moment, felt intentional rather than inert. Then the feed cut off. There was no warning. No static. No technical failure message. The screen went black and the drone stopped transmitting entirely. When the team reeled the cable back in, the tether came up clean. There was nothing on the end of it, no drone, no camera, no sensor array. The cable had not snapped. There was no damage to the end of the line. Whatever had been attached to it was simply no longer there. The team returned to their base and spent 3 days reviewing what footage existed from before the feed cut out. Frame by frame, they enhanced and stabilized every second of the descent. What they found did not simplify with scrutiny. It became more difficult to explain. The pulsing light showed, when analyzed spectrally, a frequency pattern that did not match any known bioluminescent organism, any geological process involving piezoelectric discharge, or any atmospheric phenomenon. The temperature drop was documented across multiple sensors and showed no signs of instrument failure. The shape at 580 feet remained, in every enhanced version of the frame, exactly what it had appeared to be in real time, a tall, narrow, stationary form that had not been there moments before. One team member posted a short segment of the footage to a private hosting service with a small circle of trusted contacts. Within 12 hours, it had been downloaded, copied, and redistributed across dozens of platforms. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed by millions of people. And within 72 hours, the deletion campaign began. Accounts that had uploaded the footage were suspended. Hosting services issued takedown notices that cited no specific legal authority. Several people who had saved local copies reported that the files became corrupted without explanation. One person described their external hard drive erasing itself entirely, not just the footage, but all files reformatted without any user input. A group that had hosted the footage on a private server reported the server going offline and the files being unrecoverable when they attempted to restore it. One user received a formal cease and desist letter from an organization with no publicly searchable legal registration. The letter contained no physical address and no name of an authorized signatory. The footage survived in fragments across the internet, reposted, re-downloaded, re-uploaded. It still exists in dispersed form today. No official body has ever claimed responsibility for the deletion effort. No law enforcement agency has confirmed any investigation. No government spokesperson has addressed the footage in any public statement. After the footage spread, the expedition team went offline. Not gradually, all at once. Their social media accounts went dark. Attempts by journalists and researchers to contact them by phone or email received no responses. People who had met members of the team in person said that when they tried to reach out, the contact information they had no longer functioned. No one on the team has issued a public statement, posted any content, or been confirmed to be in any specific location since the footage became public. The area near Manistash Ridge was fenced off. The satellite imagery remains blurred. Hikers and campers who have attempted to access the area in the months since have reported encountering vehicles and personnel who directed them away from the region without identifying themselves or offering any official authority. No Park Service has issued any statement about closures in the area. No federal land management agency has published any notice. The land has simply become inaccessible, without announcement and without explanation. Mel Waters, for his part, has not been located. Property records that once carried his name in Washington County were quietly amended. Passport and travel records show no trace. Tax filings no longer exist. He is not listed as deceased. He is simply absent, not dead, not moved, not imprisoned, as far as any public record shows. Just gone, in the same quiet, comprehensive way that the footage and the expedition team and the satellite images have all become gone. There are several ways to think about Mel's hole, and only one of them requires you to believe that the hole is real. The first is dismissal. Mel Waters was a creative and convincing storyteller who fabricated an elaborate fiction for reasons that were never made clear. The internet found a clearing in a forest that could have been caused by any number of entirely ordinary geological or ecological factors and decided it was supernatural. The footage was a well-produced hoax. The deletions were the natural result of copyright disputes or platform policy enforcement. There is nothing in the woods near Manistash Ridge. The second requires only slightly more concession. Mel was telling the truth about what he experienced, or believed he experienced. Something unusual exists at that location, perhaps a geological anomaly, perhaps an old military installation, perhaps something that the federal government has legitimate classified reasons to keep away from the public. The footage may be real, but may document something mundane misinterpreted as extraordinary. The silence is the product of bureaucratic secrecy, not suppression of something supernatural. The third possibility is the one that keeps people up at night, not because it requires a belief in the paranormal, but because it requires confronting how little we actually know about what lies beneath the surface of the world we think we understand. The hole is real. The things the camera recorded are real. The shape at 580 feet is real. And whatever made the drone disappear without leaving a mark on the cable, whatever reached up through the dark and took it, is still down there. Still waiting. Still watching whatever we send down into the silence. There is one question that all three possibilities leave unanswered, and it is the one that no investigator, no government agency, and no physicist has ever been able to address directly. If there is nothing in that hole, why does everyone who gets close enough come away feeling like something looked back?